Sunlight streamed through the high windows of the great hall, painting long slanted rectangles across the cold stone floor. Flick's bells jingled merrily as he cartwheeled into the light, his shadow dancing wildly against the walls like a creature possessed. The motley of his costume, a patchwork of vibrant reds and yellows, blurred into a whirlwind of color. "Behold, my liege, the acrobatic marvels of your humble fool," Flick exclaimed, springing to his feet with a flourish. His pointed shoes, curled at the tips like scrolls, slapped the floor as he landed. King Edwin sat upon his throne, a heavy brow overshadowing eyes that barely glanced up from the parchment he reviewed. A ring-laden hand stroked his bearded chin, his attention elsewhere. Flick produced a trio of balls from within his sleeves and juggled them with deft hands. "And now, sire, I present Juggling Jest to tickle your royal fancy." The balls arced through the air in perfect synchrony. The king's counselors snickered from behind their quills and ledgers, their snorts echoing in the cavernous space. But King Edwin's quill never faltered in its scratching, his indifference to Flick's performance palpable as the chill of winter. Undeterred, Flick tossed a ball higher than the rest and launched into a joke. Why did the chicken cross the moat? He caught the ball with a slap against his palm and waited for a response that never came. To see if it could swim as well as it could fly. He punctuated the punchline with a honk from his nose, a bright red bulb that squeaked under pressure. A lone chuckle rose from somewhere in the back of the hall before dying away as quickly as it had come. The king sighed and set down his quill, pinching the bridge of his nose between thumb and forefinger. Flick let the balls drop one by one into his hands and tucked them away discreetly. He took a deep bow, his head almost brushing his pointed shoes. "I live but to serve you mirth, my king." King Edwin waved him off with a dismissive snap of his fingers. "Yes, yes, very good, Flick. Now go, amuse the guards or something." With another jingle of bells and a forced smile etched on his face like a mask, Flick backed away from the throne before turning on his heel. His eyes met those of Lady Elspeth in passing. She offered him an approving tilt of her head before returning to her needlework. Flick exited through tall oak doors that closed with an ominous thud behind him. Behind the tapestry depicting the conquest of King Edwin's great-grandfather, a door clicked shut, the sound swallowed by the stone walls. Flick's fingers trailed along the rough surface as he descended a narrow staircase, his playful facade discarded with each step. At the bottom, he emerged into a dimly lit chamber where the air hung heavy with the scent of iron and oil. Here, amid shadows and silence, stood racks of swords and rows of knives that gleamed like moonlight on water. Flick plucked a dagger from its place, turning it over in his hand, examining the edge. A whisper of death cradled in his palm. He returned it with care and scanned the shelves lined with potions, each vial a promise of either salvation or peril. A soft glow emanated from maps, strewn across a large table, marked with notes in a code only he could decipher. Flick's eyes lingered on one corner, a circled fortress with lines like spiderwebs connecting it to other points of interest. He extinguished the candles one by one until darkness reclaimed the room. Slipping through another door, he emerged into a hallway that wound through the castle's heart like a secret vein. As Flick made his way through the stone corridor, his ears caught a hushed exchange drifting from an alcove hidden by shadows. He pressed himself against the wall, blending into the embrace of darkness as two courtiers spoke in tones ripe with urgency. "We must act before the new moon," one whispered, his voice threaded with tension. "Aye," agreed the other. The astrologer's readings were clear, the omens favor. Their words trailed off as they glanced around furtively before continuing their conversation in even quieter tones. Flick strained to catch more, but they spoke in riddles and half-sentences, their cryptic words floating just beyond his grasp, like leaves on a swift-moving stream. As they moved away, their footsteps echoing softly down the hall, Flick emerged from his hiding place. His mind raced with fragments of their conversation, omens and moons, pieces of a puzzle that lacked its most vital part, intent. With no time to ponder mysteries that might unfold under darkened skies, Flick merged once more with the ebb and flow of castle life. His expression settled back into its familiar jest. Within these walls, he walked unseen yet ever watchful, a guardian cloaked in motley. In the heart of the castle, the great hall boomed with the thunderous laughter of nobles and the clinking of goblets. King Edwin sat upon his throne, his gaze piercing through the revelry like a hawk surveying its domain. His eyes found Flick, who was in the midst of tumbling headlong into a tapestry, eliciting a fresh wave of mirth from the court. With a swift gesture, the king beckoned Flick to approach. The jester untangled himself from the woven threads and bounded toward the throne with a flourish that belied his underlying grace. "Flick," King Edwin began, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise of the hall. "The Queen requests your presence at tomorrow's meeting with the Arbiter of Velimore." Flick's eyes narrowed imperceptibly, but he maintained his jester's grin. "Me, your majesty, to tumble and jest for an arbiter?" Edwin replied with a look that showed the jester this was not the king's choice. "She believes your entertainment will be of use." The jester bowed, a knowing glint in his eye visible only to those who knew to look for it. The Queen's command confirmed what he had already suspected. This was no mere diplomatic gathering. In the privacy of his hidden room later that night, Flick set about preparing for the task at hand. His fingers danced over the concealed pockets sewn into his motley attire, slipping in slender daggers whose hilts were as silent as shadows against his skin. He picked up a juggling ball, rotating it to reveal a tiny seam. With precision, he filled its hollow center with smoke pellets before sealing it once more. A harmless trinket to any onlooker, but a tool of misdirection and escape in Flick's deft hands. Each piece of his ensemble transformed into an arsenal, hidden in plain sight. The bells on his cap jingled merrily as he affixed them back onto their elastic springs, their cheerful sound masking their true purpose as distractions in moments of peril. As Flick donned his jester's garb, every fold of fabric and jingle of bell held lethal potential, a juxtaposition of folly and danger that would shield him in the open yet fraught theater of political machinations. A week had ebbed away since the king's request, and the day of the meeting dawned with a sky as clear and untroubled as the courtiers practiced smiles. Within the opulent chamber where nobles gathered, Flick meandered through the crowd, his colorful garb a whirl of motion among the stately attire of diplomats and dignitaries. As he walked, his presence dissolved into the background noise of courtly exchanges. Lords and ladies dismissed him with a glance, their minds preoccupied with matters of state and whispered conspiracies. None spared a second thought for the jester who wove between them, his every step calculated, every fluttering handkerchief or tinkle of bells part of a grander design. Flick's gaze, sharp as an eagle's beneath his cap's floppy brim, caught the telltale signs only a trained eye could discern. A courtier's hand lingering near a concealed blade, the subtle tensing of muscles in preparation for action. He navigated the undercurrents of danger with an ease that belied his fool's facade, each ridiculous prop at his disposal, an extension of his deadly intent. At last, King Edwin entered with a regal air that quieted the room. Close on his heels was the Arbiter of Velimore, a towering figure draped in robes that spoke of power and an iron will to match. The two monarchs faced each other across a heavy oak table that bore witness to their strained diplomacy. Flick positioned himself just off to the side, close enough to intervene yet far enough to remain inconspicuous. He juggled with effortless flair, balls looping through the air in arcs of distraction, while his eyes never left the unfolding scene. The king and arbiter exchanged formalities before delving into heated debate. Voices rose, tempers flared. As tensions mounted, Flick noticed a shift in the room's atmosphere, a silent alarm that set his senses on edge. From beneath lowered lashes, he spied a figure detached from the rest, the hidden assassin whose presence turned air to ice despite the chamber's warmth. Positioned behind a column with sightlines clear to both rulers, the would-be killer's fingers caressed the hilt of a dagger, half hidden beneath their cloak. Flick juggled on, one eye tracking his prop's flight while the other remained fixed on this new player in his deadly performance. A silent guardian ready to strike under guise of folly. King Edwin's voice thundered through the chamber, the timbre of authority clashing with the arbiter's equally resolute tones. The two rulers, locked in a verbal sparring match, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of danger swirling beneath the surface of their words. Flick's eyes danced over the assembly, missing nothing. In the corner of his vision, he caught the subtle movement of a dark cloak, a shadow among shadows where no movement should be. The assassin had chosen their moment, a viper coiled to strike amidst the distraction of king's pride and political machinations. Flick's fingers closed around one of his juggling balls, its weight reassuring and deadly in his palm. With a flourish that seemed to belong to a farce rather than a fight, he slipped, sending the ball careening through the air. It veered off course with deceptive clumsiness, hurtling toward the hidden threat. The assassin's focus was singular, aimed at King Edwin with lethal intent. They did not see the projectile until it was too late. The ball struck true, and with a sharp click followed by a muted thud, an explosion of smoke and confusion billowed outwards. The chamber erupted into pandemonium as nobles scattered, cries of alarm mingling with the din of surprise. In that momentary blindness, none could see Flick's swift transition from entertainer to protector. The assassin, momentarily dazed but quick to recover, realized their cover was blown and bolted for an exit hidden behind an ornate tapestry. Flick sprang into action with acrobatic flair that turned his chase into a performance. He vaulted over an overturned chair, a nobleman's seat turned obstacle, landing with an exaggerated stumble that drew chuckles even in the midst of chaos. His roll across the floor dodged grasping hands and skirts as he followed his quarry's fleeting shadow. Through curtains and corridors they dashed. Flick's every tumble and pratfall a calculated maneuver, designed to close the distance between him and the assassin while maintaining his guise as nothing more than a jester, caught up in events beyond his control. But beneath this masquerade lay a predator's focus. Each slip was chased by acceleration, every wild gesticulation a feint concealing his true pursuit. The assassin ran hard, but Flick matched their pace with deceptive ease, a fool in motley who was anything but foolish. The assassin's breath came in ragged gasps, their boots pounding the stone as they fled through the labyrinthine passages of the castle. Behind them, Flick bounded with the grace of a dancer, his colorful garb a blur against the gray stone. The chase led them to the deserted courtyard, moonlight casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Here in this silent arena the duel would unfold. The assassin whirled, dagger glinting in the pale light, only to find Flick already upon them. With a flourish that seemed more at home on stage than in battle, Flick reached into his belt and flung a rubber chicken at his opponent. The assassin sneered, swatting it aside, but as it struck their hand, the chicken's beak ejected a needle tipped with fast-acting paralytic. Staggering back, the assassin shook off the effects of the toxin with trained resilience. They lunged forward, but Flick was not there. His nimble leap carried him over a low wall, an acrobat's trick turned evasive maneuver. "Enough of this folly!" the assassin growled, frustration sharpening their features. Flick chuckled merrily, tipping his hat in mock salute before tossing it like a frisbee. It spun through the air, harmless, surely. But as it neared its target, it erupted into a burst of blinding light and sound. The assassin recoiled, disoriented by the unexpected assault. Flick closed in. He produced from his sleeve a bouquet of flowers and presented it with a bow. The assassin's eyes narrowed in suspicion, but their hesitation proved costly. From within the petals sprung a net, ensnaring them with its entangling fibers. With a deft motion that belied his jester's persona, Flick drew another hidden blade and held it to the incapacitated assassin's throat. "Yield," he commanded, his voice no longer carrying the lilt of jest, but rather the weight of authority. The courtyard lay still but for their heavy breathing. Flick stood over his fallen adversary, a master of combat disguised as a fool. It was then that King Edwin emerged from the shadows at the edge of the courtyard, his eyes locked onto Flick's stance. The victorious warrior poised above his enemy, and understanding dawned in his gaze. Flick met his king's eyes, and for an instant allowed himself to be seen, not as the jester, but as the protector he truly was. A silent communication passed between them, a recognition of what had been concealed beneath layers of tomfoolery and mirth. The moment hung between them like a drawn bowstring, until Flick let slip into his customary foolishness once more, letting out an exaggerated gasp, as if he had only just realized where he stood and what he had done. "Oh my!" he exclaimed with feigned surprise. "What strange luck!" As the echo of Flick's feigned astonishment faded into the night, the courtyard gates swung open with urgency. Guards poured in, swords drawn, eyes wide with alarm. Courtiers followed, their faces a tapestry of confusion and fear, searching for the source of the commotion that had disrupted their false serenity. The king stepped forward, his hand raised to still the tide of questions and commands that threatened to overflow from his royal guard. With a practiced ease, he turned to the crowd, his expression morphing into one of amusement as he regarded the scene before him. "My loyal subjects," King Edwin announced with a hearty chuckle that seemed to warm the cool night air, "fear not. It appears our jester has saved the day through fortunate happenstance." Laughter bubbled up from the assembly, relief washing over them like a balm. They looked upon Flick, still standing over the subdued assassin, now with a bashful shrug and an exaggeratedly confused tilt of his head, and saw only the clownish hero of an unlikely farce. The king approached Flick, clapping him on the shoulder with a grin that held more than simple mirth. "It seems your antics have proven more valuable than any of us could have imagined," he said, loud enough for all to hear, yet laden with a silent acknowledgement shared only between them. Flick responded with an innocent smile, his eyes dancing with concealed knowledge. "Your Majesty," he replied in mock humility. "I only wish to keep spirits high, though I dare say this was not quite what I had in mind." With that, Flick let himself be swept up in the swell of returning courtiers as they guided him back toward the castle's heart. The guards escorted the restrained assassin away, their faces etched with a respect for Flick they had never shown before. Back within the great hall, order restored and danger thwarted for now, Flick resumed his performance. He tumbled and twirled amidst peals of laughter that rang truer than before, each fall and fumble punctuated by knowing glances from those who had witnessed his uncharacteristic display of valor. King Edwin watched from his throne, a softness touching his stern features whenever his gaze landed upon his jester. The mask of royalty could not conceal the burgeoning respect that glinted in his eyes, a respect for the man who wore folly as a cloak, yet wielded cunning and courage with equal skill. As Flick cartwheeled past the throne in a particularly flamboyant display of clumsiness, he caught Edwin's eye and allowed himself a small wink, an unspoken pact between king and protector that went unnoticed by all but them. Safe once more behind his jester's facade, Flick continued to entertain, a silent guardian ever vigilant beneath his cap and bells.